A handwritten check for $3,000 sat on the mahogany table next to the cold turkey. It was charity for the failure they thought walked dogs for a living. Unaware my signature this morning was worth 10,000 times that amount. I started to decline, but the breaking news jingle from the 85-inch TV cut through their arrogance. At that moment, I knew this Christmas was the last time they would ever look down on me. My name is Riley Windermere, and as I turned the wheel of my rented Ford Fusion, guiding it up the winding, salt-dusted asphalt of the driveway, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with the freezing Connecticut winter. The car was a beige, nondescript sedan that smelled faintly of industrial lemon cleaner and previous driver's stale coffee. It was the kind of vehicle chosen specifically for its ability to disappear, to scream mediocrity, to whisper that its driver had simply given up. It looked comically out of place parked next to the looming, Georgian-style brick mansion that my parents called home. To my left, the garage doors were open, revealing my father's vintage Jaguar and my mother's pristine Range Rover. My little beige rental looked like a smudge of dirt on a white linen tablecloth. I put the car in park and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, amplified by the muffling effect of the snow that blanketed the manicured lawns of Greenwich. Here, in this zip code, silence cost money. It cost landscaping crews and triple-paned glass and enough acreage to ensure you never had to hear your neighbor's dog bark. I sat there for a moment, gripping the cheap plastic of the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. I was 31 years old. In my other life, the one that existed 3,000 miles away in San Francisco, I commanded rooms filled with men twice my age. I moved markets with a single press release. I had a security detail that called me principal, and a personal assistant who knew my coffee order before I even knew I was thirsty. But here, in this driveway, I was none of those things. I looked down at my wrist. It was bare. It felt phantom light without the weight of the Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime that usually rested there. That watch alone was worth $200,000. A piece of engineering so exquisite it belonged in a museum. I had left it in a safety deposit box in Manhattan this morning. Instead, I pulled the sleeve of my sweater down to my thumb. The sweater was a calculated choice. It was a navy wool blend I had bought at a thrift store 5 years ago, slightly pilled at the elbows, just loose enough to hide the tailored fit of my body, suggesting a diet of ramen noodles and stress rather than organic greens and Pilates. My jeans were generic denim, faded at the knees. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. No blowout, no diamond studs. Just Riley, the struggler. Riley, the disappointment. "Showtime," I whispered to the empty car. I stepped out into the biting cold. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my cheeks. I trudged up the stone path, deliberately not walking with the confident. Long strides I used in the corridors of affection. I rounded my shoulders forward, shrinking myself, making myself smaller, softer, more apologetic. This was the mask they had carved for me, and for the sake of the peace, I had worn it for 3 years. Today, however, the mask felt heavier than usual. Today, I knew what lay beneath it. I didn't knock. I still had a key, a heavy brass thing that felt archaic in my hand. I pushed the massive oak door open and stepped into the foyer. The heat hit me first, dry and smelling of cinnamon and expensive pine. The house was exactly as I remembered it, immaculate, grand, and utterly devoid of warmth. A 12-foot Christmas tree dominated the foyer, draped in silver and gold ribbons, shimmering with hundreds of white lights. It was beautiful in the way a department store display is beautiful, perfect to look at. But you wouldn't want to touch it for fear of leaving a fingerprint. "Riley?" The voice came from the drawing room to my right. My mother, Eleanor Windermere, appeared in the archway. She was holding a crystal flute of champagne, her posture as rigid as the steel beams in the skyscrapers my brother designed. She wore a cashmere cardigan in a soft cream color that probably cost more than the car I had just parked outside, paired with dark slacks that held a razor-sharp crease. She didn't smile. Instead, her eyes performed the ritual I had dubbed the scan. Her gaze started at my boots' scuffed leather. Practical. Cheap moved up to my faded jeans, paused at the pilled sweater, and finally landed on my face. It was a clinical assessment, like a health inspector looking for code violations. "You made it," she said, her tone neutral. There was no hug, no rushing forward to embrace the daughter she hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. "Traffic on I-95 is horrid this time of year. I hope you left early enough to avoid the worst of it." "I did. Mom, the drive wasn't too bad," I said, forcing my voice to sound thin, lacking its usual resonance. "The house looks festive." "We try," she said, taking a sip of her champagne. She gestured vaguely at my outfit with the hand holding the glass. "I see you're still favoring that casual look. I suppose it's practical for your lifestyle." "It's comfortable," I said. "And warm." "Comfortable," she echoed, testing the word as if it were a synonym for lazy. "Well, go hang your coat in the closet. Don't drape it over the banister, please. The caterers are coming in and out later. I don't want it to look cluttered." I did as I was told. As I hung my parka next to her mink coat, the difference in texture made me want to laugh. If she only knew that the casual lifestyle she sneered at had just secured a contract with the Department of Defense worth $12 billion. If she knew that the woman standing in her foyer could buy this entire neighborhood and turn it into a wind farm without denting her liquidity. But I held my tongue. The game wasn't over yet. I walked into the living room. My father, Robert Windermere, was seated in his leather wingback chair by the fireplace. A fire crackled politely in the hearth gas. Of course, because wood was too messy. He was hidden behind the spread-open pages of the Wall Street Journal. Smoke from his cigar curled up toward the high ceiling. "Hello, Dad," I said. The newspaper didn't lower. "Riley," he grunted. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of presence, like noticing a draft from an open window. "You're late. I thought you said you'd be here by 4. "It's 4:15, Dad," I replied softly. "Time is money," he muttered, turning a page with a sharp snap. "Although I suppose in your line of work, the clock is a bit more flexible." I sat on the edge of the velvet sofa opposite him, keeping my knees together, hands folded in my lap. "How have you been, Dad? How is the firm?" "Retired? Riley, I am retired. You would know that if you called more than once a quarter," he said, finally lowering the paper an inch to peer at me over his reading glasses. His eyes were hard, the color of slate. "But the firm is fine. Lucas is handling the merger for the Henderson account. Big deal. Complicated. Something you need a real head for figures to understand." I bit the inside of my cheek. The Henderson merger was valued at $50 million. A cute number. I had spent $50 million on RD last month alone. "That's great for Lucas," I said. My mother glided into the room and sat on the arm of my father's chair, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. They looked like a portrait of old money aristocracy, a united front against the chaos of the world. And apparently, against their youngest daughter. "So," my mother began, the word hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. "Riley, have there been any developments since we last spoke?" I knew exactly what she meant. She wasn't asking about my happiness, my health, or my love life. She was asking if I had stopped embarrassing them. "I'm doing well, Mom," I said. "The project I'm working on is really picking up steam. We just hit a major milestone this week." My mother sighed. It was a long, melodramatic exhalation through her nose. She exchanged a look with my father. "Project," she repeated. "Is this still the community garden initiative?" "It's in the energy sector, Mom. Sustainable systems," I corrected gently. "And it's not a garden." "Right. Saving the planet," my father scoffed, rattling his newspaper. "Let me tell you something, Riley. The world runs on oil and gas. It runs on hard assets, real companies, not dreams and fairy dust and recycled plastic bottles." "It's a bit more complex than that," I said. "Is it paid?" my mother asked sharply. "This milestone, did it come with a paycheck? A 401k, health insurance?" "I'm covering my own expenses, Mom," I'm fine. Fine, she said, shaking her head. You're 31, Riley. Fine is for college students backpacking through Europe. At your age, you should be established. You should be building equity. Instead, you're dabbling. I'm not dabbling, I said, feeling a flash of irritation that I quickly tamped down. I'm building something of my own. Walking dogs and recycling cans is not building something, my father cut in, his voice rising. It's surviving, and barely. From the looks of you, he gestured at my sweater with his cigar. You look like you shop at the Salvation Army. It's undignified. Riley, we gave you an education, private schools, a degree from Brown, and for what? So you could play hippie in San Francisco while your brother builds skylines. I'm happy, Dad. I lied. I wasn't happy. I was exhausted, exhilaratingly stressed, and triumphant. But I couldn't tell him that. Not yet. Happiness doesn't pay the mortgage, he grumbled, raising the paper back up, effectively ending the conversation. Lucas will be here soon. Try not to ask him for money the second he walks in the door. It puts him in an awkward position. My jaw tightened. I had never asked Lucas for a dime, not once, but in the mythology of the Windermere family. I was the leech, and Lucas was the host. Facts didn't matter here. Only narratives did. I'll go wash up for dinner, I said, standing up. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, like all the oxygen had been sucked out by the fire and their disapproval. I walked out of the living room and down the long hallway that led to the guest powder room. The hallway was lined with wainscoting and framed photographs, a timeline of family glory. I slowed my pace, walking past them. There was Lucas at his graduation, gown billowing, a summa cum laude cord around his neck. There was my sister, Sarah, cutting the ribbon at her new dermatology clinic in Boston. There was Lucas again, shaking hands with the mayor of New York. There was Lucas's wedding, a black tie affair that had cost $400,000. There was a photo of Sarah's twins. There was a photo of the family on a yacht in the Mediterranean taken 3 years ago. I wasn't in it. I had been in the lab that summer, sleeping 4 hours a night, coding the initial algorithms for the bio-battery interface. I walked the entire length of the hallway, 20 feet of wall space, dozens of frames, and not a single picture of me. The last photo of me had been removed 2 Christmases ago. It was a picture from my college graduation. Now, in its place, hung a framed architectural rendering of a shopping mall Lucas had designed. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the rendering, a shopping mall. They had replaced their daughter with a drawing of a food court. The message was clear. It wasn't subtle. It was a scream in the silence of the house. You do not belong here. You have nothing to show for your life. You are invisible until you become what we want you to be. My chest ached, a physical pang of rejection that no amount of money in the bank could numb. I was the CEO of the most valuable private company in the tech sector. I was on the cover of magazines that were currently sitting on newsstands all over the world. But in this hallway, in this house, I was a ghost. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lemon polish and indifference. I let the hurt wash over me, feeling its cold sting. Then, I let it go. I replaced it with the steel that had gotten me through 5 years of investor rejections and technical failures. They wanted a failure. I would give them the greatest performance of a failure they had ever seen. I turned away from the wall of fame and walked into the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, drying it with a hand towel that was softer than my bedsheets back at the dorms I had built for my interns. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bright, hard, and dangerous. Just wait, I whispered to my reflection. Just wait until dessert. I could hear the front door opening down the hall. Booming voices, laughter, the heavy thud of expensive luggage hitting the floor. Lucas had arrived. The golden boy was home, and the contrast was about to become excruciating. I straightened my pilled sweater, put my mask back firmly in place, and went out to face the firing squad. The arrival of my brother was less of an entrance and more of a coronation. The front door swung open, admitting a gust of freezing air and the booming baritone of Lucas Windermere. At 35, Lucas was the physical manifestation of the family's expectations. He was tall, with the kind of jawline that suggested strong moral character and a hairline that defied the stress of his profession. He wore a camel hair coat that looked soft enough to sleep in, and a scarf tied in a knot so intricate it probably required a tutorial to achieve. Behind him trailed his wife, Catherine, and their 2 children, Noah and Emma. Catherine was a woman who treated her appearance like a full-time job she was terrified of losing. She was blonde, petite, and wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, as if she were constantly bracing for a social faux pas. The children, 7 and 5 respectively, were dressed like miniature adults in pea coats and polished leather shoes, looking less like kids and more like accessories to the perfect suburban tableau. "Mother, father," Lucas announced, dropping his leather weekender bag with a heavy thud that sounded expensive. The traffic was absolute murder on the Merritt Parkway, but the new Rover handled it like a dream. Heated seats in the rear. The kids didn't complain once. My mother rushed past me as if I were a coat rack, her arms outstretched. "Lucas, oh, you're here. We were just worried you'd be caught in the storm." I stood by the doorway of the living room, watching the embrace. It was warm, genuine, and lingering everything my greeting had not been. My father actually stood up from his chair, folding his newspaper and placing it on the side table, a gesture of respect he hadn't afforded me in a decade. "Good to see you, son," my father said, clapping Lucas on the back. "You look tired, working hard." "You know how it is, Dad," Lucas said, unwinding his scarf with a flourish. "The Dubai project is entering the final design phase. The client wants to add another 10 stories to the spire. We are talking about re-engineering the entire wind load strategy. I've been on Zoom calls with structural engineers at 3 in the morning for the last 2 weeks. "Incredible," my mother breathed, looking at him as if he had just discovered a cure for the common cold. "You are working too hard. It pays off. Mom, the end-of-year bonus just cleared," Lucas said, winking at Catherine. "Let's just say the Maldives trip is getting an upgrade to the presidential villa." I finally stepped forward. "Hi, Lucas." "Hi, Catherine." Lucas turned to me, his smile dimming by about 30%. It was the smile one gives to a waiter who has brought the wrong order, polite, but dismissive. "Riley, didn't see you there in the shadows. You made it." "I did," I said. He stepped forward and gave me a one-armed hug, his body rigid. He smelled of expensive cologne and success. "Good to see you, kiddo. Still driving. What was it, the rental?" "It gets me from point A to point B," I said, pulling away. Catherine stepped up next, pecking me on the cheek. Her skin was cold. "Riley, honey, you look well, rested." She said rested the way one might say unemployed. "Thanks, Catherine. You look great," I replied. "Oh, stop." She waved a hand, flashing a diamond ring that caught the light from the chandelier. "I feel like a mess. Managing the house renovation and the kids' prep school applications has been a nightmare. But tell me about you. Are you still in that apartment in the Mission District? The one above the, what was it? The bodega." "It's a taqueria," I corrected. "And yes, I'm still there." Catherine frowned, a performance of deep concern. "I was reading in the Chronicle just the other day about the crime rates in that neighborhood. There was a shooting just 2 blocks from there. Wasn't there, Riley? It really isn't safe for a single woman. You know, Lucas and I were saying just last week, we worry about you down there." I kept my face perfectly neutral. I didn't tell her that the apartment above the taqueria was actually the penthouse of a 4-story building I had purchased in cash 18 months ago. I didn't tell her that I had renovated the bottom 3 floors into rent-free housing for the engineering interns at my company, so they wouldn't have to struggle with San Francisco's impossible rent prices. I didn't tell her that the bodega owner paid me rent in tacos, and that the neighborhood watch was funded by a grant I had anonymously provided. To them, I was living in squalor. To me, I was living in the heart of the community I was trying to empower. "I like the vibrancy," I said simply. "The neighbors look out for each other." "Vibrancy," Lucas chuckled, shaking his head as he accepted a glass of scotch from my father. That is a polite word for noise pollution and grit. You know, Riley, there comes a point where bohemian just becomes sad. You are 31. Most people your age are looking for school districts, not vibrancy. Not everyone wants the white picket fence. Lucas, I said, my voice steady. It is not about the fence, Riley, he said, taking a sip of the amber liquid. It is about stability. It is about having a foundation. Let's not argue, my mother interjected. Though she looked pleased by Lucas's lecture, let's move to the dining room. Dinner is ready. Lucas, you sit at the head, opposite your father. Riley, you can squeeze in on the side next to the children. The hierarchy was physical. The seating chart was a map of our worth. The dining room was a cavernous space with dark wood paneling and a chandelier that looked like an upside-down wedding cake. The table was set with the good china, the Wedgwood service for 12 that only came out when there was someone worth impressing. Clearly, that someone was Lucas. As we ate, the conversation became a monologue. Lucas held court, detailing the intricacies of the Dubai skyline, the stupidity of his junior architects, and the sheer brilliance of his own vision. The client wanted marble, Lucas said, cutting into his turkey with surgical precision. I told him, listen, marble is for bathrooms in New Jersey. You want quartzite. You want something that catches the desert sun. It added $2 million to the budget. But he thanked me for it. He listens to you, my mother said, spooning a second helping of stuffing onto Lucas's plate, bypassing mine completely. That is because you command respect. Lucas, you have presence. It is about expertise, Mom, Lucas said, feigning humility. People pay for the best. My father cleared his throat, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He turned his gaze to me. It was the look he used to give juries before delivering a closing argument, pitiful and condescending. Speaking of expertise, my father began, his voice booming slightly in the quiet room. Lucas, I was thinking, does your firm have any openings in the administrative department? Maybe a receptionist role? Or perhaps in the mailroom? The fork froze halfway to my mouth. I lowered it slowly to the plate. Dad, I am serious. Riley, my father continued, ignoring me and keeping his eyes on Lucas. Your sister needs help. She is drifting. It keeps your mother up at night. She needs health insurance. She needs a 401k match. She needs to understand what it means to clock in and clock out. Lucas let out a short, sharp laugh. Dad, come on. We are a premier firm. We hire top talent. Even our receptionists have master's degrees in communications. She is a Windermere, my father insisted. She is smart enough. She just lacks direction. If you put her in a structured environment, maybe some of your discipline would rub off on her. You could keep an eye on her. Make sure she actually works. My hand gripped the silver fork so hard, the intricate patterns on the handle dug into my skin. I could feel the pulse thumping in my fingertips. I wanted to reach into my pocket, pull out the titanium business card with CEO, Apexion Biosystems, laser-etched onto it, and spin it across the table like a shuriken. I wanted to scream that I had just hired a former NASA director to run my logistics division. I wanted to tell them that my lack of direction was actually a strategic pivot that had revolutionized battery storage technology, but I couldn't. Not yet. The reveal had to be perfect. The news special was less than an hour away. I don't know, Dad, Lucas said, leaning back in his chair and looking at me with a mixture of amusement and pity. The pressure is pretty high. It is a fast-paced environment. We deal with billions of dollars in assets. One lost email, one missed phone call, and it could cost us a fortune. Riley is used to a different pace. She is used to vibrancy. I'm not sure she could handle the rigors of a corporate schedule. She has always been a bit free-spirited, undisciplined. I am sitting right here, I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the air. We know you are, dear, Catherine said, patting my hand as if I were a toddler who had just dropped an ice cream cone. They are just trying to help. Lucas is just being realistic. You know how you get overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, I repeated. When have I ever been overwhelmed? Remember when you quit the debate team in high school? Lucas pointed out immediately. Too much pressure. I quit because the coach was a misogynist who wouldn't let the girls speak during rebuttals, I said tight-lipped. See? Lucas gestured to our father. Excuses. Always an excuse. In the corporate world, Riley, you cannot just quit because you do not like the boss. You have to grit your teeth. I just do not think you're cut out for it. Stick to the dog walking, or whatever it is. Less harm done if you drop a leash than if you drop a contract. The insult was so casual, so easily delivered, that it took the breath out of me. He truly believed it. He truly believed I was incapable of basic responsibility. I took a sip of water, letting the cold liquid cool the fire in my throat. I appreciate the concern, I said, my voice eerily calm. But I am not looking for a job. I have a job. A gig is not a job, Riley, my father corrected. But fine, have it your way. Starve. Just don't come crying to us when the rent goes up and your vibrancy turns into an eviction notice. The table fell silent again. Save for the scraping of silverware, I focused on my peas, pushing them around the plate, counting them. 1, 2, 3 billion. 4, 5, 6 billion. Then, a small voice broke the silence. Aunt Riley. It was Noah, my 7-year-old nephew. He was looking at me with wide, saucer-like eyes, his face smeared with gravy. Yes, Noah? I asked, softening my expression. Is it true you don't have any money? Catherine gasped. Noah, that is rude. But Daddy said so, Noah insisted, pointing a fork at Lucas. Daddy told Mommy that Aunt Riley is destitute. He said, You are the family charity case. The air in the room didn't just freeze. It solidified into ice. Lucas turned a shade of red that clashed with his expensive tie. My mother suddenly found the centerpiece of holly very interesting. Daddy said we have to be nice to you because you don't have anything, Noah continued, his voice innocent and loud. He reached under the table and fumbled with something in his lap. A moment later, he lifted a heavy ceramic pig painted in bright blue. He pushed the piggy bank across the white tablecloth. It scraped loudly against the china, a harsh sound in the silent room. It came to a stop right next to my hand. You can have this, Noah said, beaming with the generosity of a child who doesn't understand the cruelty of adults. There are $40 in there, from my birthday. You can buy some food so you don't have to eat the dog food. He doesn't mean that, Catherine stammered, horrified. He misunderstood. I didn't, Noah argued. Daddy said Aunt Riley lives like a dog, so she probably eats like one too. I looked at the piggy bank, then I looked at Lucas. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a flash of panic. Not because he was sorry, but because his cruelty had been exposed in its rawest form. He hadn't just insulted me, he had taught his children to pity me as something subhuman. I placed my hand on the cold ceramic pig. I looked at Noah, and for a second, my mask slipped. I let genuine warmth flood my eyes for the boy, even as my heart turned to stone for his father. Thank you, Noah, I said softly. That is the kindest offer anyone has made me all day. You are a good man. Much better than some. I slid the pig back to him, but I promise you, I don't need it. Keep it. Save it. One day, you might want to build something of your own. Something real. I looked up at Lucas. Our eyes locked. Besides, I said, my voice dropping an octave, $40 wouldn't even cover the tax on my coffee budget. What is that supposed to mean? Lucas snapped. Defensive now that he had been caught. Don't get haughty just because a child showed you some pity. Riley, it is embarrassing. You are right. Lucas, I said, picking up my wineglass. It is embarrassing, but not for me. Okay. My mother clapped her hands loudly, the sound startling everyone. Who wants pie? We have pumpkin and pecan. Catherine, help me clear the table. Riley, stay put. You will just drop something. I watched them scramble to reset the scene, to sweep the ugly truth back under the rug of politeness. I sat there, gripping the stem of my wine glass, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the television in the other room. Breaking news was coming. And God, I couldn't wait. The transition from the dining room to the formal living room felt less like a family moving to a place of comfort and more like a jury retiring to deliver a verdict. My father poured himself a generous glass of brandy, the crystal decanter clinking softly in the heavy silence that had settled over us since Noah's innocent. Brutal comment about the piggy bank. My mother busied herself with the distribution of gifts, a task she performed with the grim efficiency of a quartermaster handing out rations. We took our assigned places. Lucas and Catherine claimed the love seat, their bodies angled toward each other in a display of marital solidarity. My parents sat in their matching armchairs. I took the ottoman near the fireplace, a seat that was physically lower than everyone else's. It was a subtle piece of staging that I'm sure my mother had arranged subconsciously, ensuring I literally had to look up to receive their benevolence. "Lucas first," my mother announced, her voice regaining its sugary lilt, the earlier tension plastered over with festive denial. "Because he has been such a good boy this year." She handed him a long, heavy box wrapped in silver paper with a navy ribbon the colors of his firm. Lucas tore into it with a lack of reserve that was almost charming if you didn't know the entitlement that fueled it. He ripped away the cardboard to reveal a leather golf bag. But not just any bag. Inside were a set of irons that gleamed with an unmistakable, buttery yellow luster. "Gold-plated," my father said, leaning forward, a rare smile breaking his stoic mask. "Honma Beres, 5-star rating. Custom ordered from Japan. I had to pull a few strings to get them here in time." Lucas let out a low whistle, pulling a 7-iron from the bag and testing its weight. "Dad, these are unbelievable. This is $20,000 worth of hardware." "You earned it," my father said, raising his brandy snifter. "A man who builds skylines shouldn't be playing with off-the-rack clubs. Appearance matters. Lucas, on the green. This tells the client you are a winner before you even tee off." "Thank you." "Dad, seriously." Lucas beamed, swinging the club gently, narrowly missing the expensive vase on the mantelpiece. "I have a tea time with the CEO of Meridian on Tuesday. These will definitely send the right message." Next came Catherine. Her gift was smaller, a velvet box from Tiffany Company. She opened it to reveal a diamond tennis bracelet, the stones large enough to be visible from across the room. She shrieked, a high-pitched sound of performed delight, and rushed to kiss my mother's cheek. "It is stunning, Eleanor, absolutely stunning. It matches the earrings you gave me last year perfectly." "We wanted you to have the set," my mother purred. "You are the mother of our grandchildren. You deserve to sparkle." Then, the room went quiet. The rustling of paper stopped. The air grew heavy again. It was my turn. My mother reached behind the tree and pulled out a package. It was starkly different from the silver and gold that had just been torn apart. It was wrapped in plain brown butcher paper, tied with a piece of rough twine. It looked like something you would receive in the mail from a government agency, or perhaps a care package sent to a soldier on the front lines of a losing war. "Here, Riley," my mother said, extending the box toward me. She didn't stand up. I had to lean forward, stretching from my low perch on the ottoman to take it from her hand. "We decided to be practical this year," my mother explained, her voice dropping to a tone of somber responsibility. "We know you don't have space for luxuries, and honestly, giving you jewelry or gadgets felt irresponsible when your basics are so precarious." I held the box. It was light, insultingly light. I untied the twine, my fingers steady despite the rage beginning to boil in my stomach. I peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a cardboard box. I lifted the lid. Lying on top was a stack of paper booklets. I picked them up. They were coupon books, not gift cards to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, but literal clippings and booklets for budget bulk stores and generic grocery chains. Save 50 cents on canned beans. Buy one, get one free on frozen dinners. Underneath the coupons was a paperback book, The cover was bright yellow and black. The corners slightly dog-eared, as if it had been bought used. The title screamed up at me in bold, sans serif font resume writing for beginners, how to translate life experience into employable skills. I stared at the book. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. My resume was currently on the desk of the Secretary of Energy. My CV was being studied by headhunters who would kill to poach me. And here I was, holding a guide on how to format a header. "It is a very highly rated book," my father said, his voice gruff. "I read the reviews. It helps people who have gaps, like you. It teaches you how to spin those years you spent finding yourself into something that looks like work ethic." "Spin?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "And there is one more thing," my mother said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a white envelope. She placed it on the coffee table and slid it across the polished wood until it hit the edge of the brown box I was holding. "Open it," she commanded gently. I didn't need to open it to know what it was, but I performed the ritual. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the check. It was written in my father's cramped, spiky handwriting, "Pay to the order of Riley Windermere." The amount was written out in careful cursive, $3,000.00. "It is for next month's rent," my mother said, leaning back with a sigh of benevolence. "And maybe some decent clothes for interviews. We don't want you to worry about being evicted. Riley, I spoke to Mrs. Higgins down the street, and she told me her son saw someone getting kicked out of an apartment in the Mission last week. I couldn't bear the thought of the neighbors here finding out our daughter was on the street. It would be humiliating for everyone." "Humiliating for you," I corrected softly. "For the family," she insisted. "Take the money. Put it in the bank. Do not spend it on whatever it is you spend money on. Hemp seeds or protest signs." I looked at the check. $3,000. It was an amount I now made roughly every 4 minutes in interest alone. "Mom, Dad," I started, placing the check back on the table. "I don't need this. I really don't. I have money. My project, the company I built it, is doing very well. Extremely well." My father let out a noise that was half laugh, half snort. He swirled his brandy. "Riley, stop. Just stop. We are trying to help you. Do not let your pride get in the way of a hot meal. What is this project anyway? Is it still that rooftop gardening thing, or are you picking up trash for recycling credits?" "It is biosystems engineering." "Dad," I said, my voice tightening. "It is energy storage. It is not a garden." "It is a hobby," he barked, slamming his glass down on the coaster. "It is a hobby for the idle. You play at saving the world because you are terrified of the real world. You are terrified of accountability. That is not a profession. Riley, Lucas has a profession. Sarah has a profession. You have a pastime." "It is a corporation," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "With employees, with patents." "Oh, please," Lucas chuckled from the sofa, shaking his head as he polished a smudge off his new gold putter. "Is this like that time 2 years ago when you tried to pitch us that investment opportunity?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 years ago, Thanksgiving, I had just incorporated a Pection. I had secured my first seed funding, a modest amount, but enough to validate the science. I was so proud. I had brought the pitch deck home, naive enough to think they would be impressed by the science, by the sheer ambition of stabilizing a solid-state battery. I remembered standing in this very room, explaining the electron flow, the density metrics, and I remembered the look on their faces, not confusion, not curiosity, but pity. "Is this like Amway?" my mother had asked. "Do you have to sell inventory to your friends?" "It sounds like a pyramid scheme, Riley," my father had said, refusing to even look at the graphs. "Battery technology. You got a C in high school physics. Leave the science to the scientists. If you need money, just ask. But do not try to scam us with some multi-level marketing nonsense." They had laughed. They had actually laughed. Lucas had made a joke about me selling batteries door to door like Girl Scout cookies. That was the night I stopped trying. That was the night I realized that to them, I wasn't just unemployed. I was intellectually incapable. They didn't just think I was broke. They thought I was stupid. I looked at them now, sitting amidst the wrapping paper and the smell of expensive pine. The anger that rose in me wasn't the hot, fiery rage of the misunderstood. It was cold. It was the absolute 0-degree freeze of realization. It wasn't about the money. They didn't give me the coupons because they thought I was hungry. They gave them to me because they needed me to be hungry. I was the control group in the experiment of their lives. For Lucas to be the golden boy, there had to be a baseline of failure to compare him against. I was the cautionary tale that made their success feel earned. I was the sacrificial lamb on the altar of the Windermere ego. If I were successful, if I were brilliant, wealthy, and powerful, then Lucas was just a guy who designed shopping malls. And my father was just a retired lawyer with a bad temper. My failure was the glue holding this family's narrative together. "You are right," I said quietly. Picking up the check again, I didn't tear it up. Not yet. I held it between my fingers, feeling the texture of the paper. I should be more practical. I should listen to the experts. "Exactly, my mother said, relieved, mistaking my resignation for submission. "We just want you to be safe, Riley. We want you to be realistic. Realism is important," I agreed. "It is very dangerous to live in a fantasy world." I looked at the resume book. How to translate life experience into employable skills. "I will keep that in mind," I said. "Thank you for the gift. It is illuminating. It shows me exactly where I stand." "Good," my father grunted. "Now, put that check away before you lose it. And for God's sake, cash it before the end of the month. I don't want it messing up my balancing." "I wouldn't dream of messing up your accounts, Dad," I said. The clock on the mantel chimed the half-hour. 4:30. 30 minutes until the broadcast. 30 minutes until the fantasy world they had built, the one where they were the kings and I was the jester, burned to the ground. I placed the coupon book on my lap, smoothing the cover with a terrifying gentleness. "Shall we have tea?" I asked, my voice light, almost cheerful. "I believe there is a special on CNN tonight. Something about the future. We really shouldn't miss it." Lucas yawned, stretching his arms. "Sure, why not? Although I doubt CNN knows anything about the future. If you want to know where the market is going, you should be reading the reports I send you." "Dad." "I always do, son," my father said. "I always do." They had no idea. They sat there, smug in their certainty, surrounded by their gold clubs and diamonds, pitying the girl with the coupons. They were looking at a tiger and seeing a house cat, and they were about to make the fatal mistake of pulling its tail one too many times. We migrated from the dining room to the main living area like a herd of well-fed cattle moving to a new pasture. The transition was sluggish, weighed down by the heavy meal and the even heavier atmosphere of self-congratulation that hung over the house. My mother led the way, orchestrating the post-dinner ritual with the precision of a stage manager. She directed the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, to bring out the silver tea service and the tray of petit fours, ignoring the fact that we had just consumed enough calories to power a small village for a week. I took a seat in the corner of the room, choosing a high-backed armchair that offered a strategic vantage point. It was far enough away from the central cluster of sofas to be considered antisocial, but close enough to observe the dynamics. My mother bustled about, fluffing pillows and adjusting the lighting, while my father settled back into his leather throne, loosening his tie. Lucas and Catherine took the long sofa, flanked by their children who had been given iPads to keep them silent. On the far wall, the 85-inch television was already on, tuned to CNN. The volume was low, a hum of background noise that nobody was really paying attention to. It was a special end-of-year program titled Faces Changing the Decade, a montage of politicians, tech moguls, and activists flashing across the screen. Lucas, naturally, could not let the silence stand. He had an opinion on everything, and the current state of the global economy was his favorite pulpit. He swirled his tea, looking at the steam rising from the cup with a furrowed brow. acting as if he were reading tea leaves that predicted the fall of empires. "You know, Dad," Lucas began, his voice projecting to the back of the room, "I was looking at your portfolio the other day. I saw you move some assets into those traditional energy bonds. Smart move. Very stable." "I like stability," my father grunted, reaching for a shortbread cookie. "I don't like surprises." "Exactly," Lucas nodded, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "That is the problem with this market right now. Too much volatility. Everyone is chasing the next big thing in green tech. It is a bubble, Dad, a massive, unstable bubble. I was reading a report from Goldman this morning, the summary anyway, and they are warning about overvaluation in the renewables sector." I took a sip of my tea. It was lukewarm and bitter. I watched Lucas, fascinated by his confidence. He was talking about my world. He was lecturing on the very landscape I had terraformed. "Is that so?" my father asked, interested now. "I kept hearing about this surge in battery tech, some breakthrough in storage capacity." "Vaporware," Lucas scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "It is all smoke and mirrors. These startups in Silicon Valley, they make these wild claims to get venture capital funding. They say they have solved the density problem, or they have created a perpetual cycle loop. But when you look under the hood, it is nothing. Just a slightly better lithium-ion cell and a lot of marketing hype. I wouldn't touch those stocks with a 10-foot pole. You are better off putting your money into commercial real estate." "Concrete and steel, Dad. That is real." "I suppose you are right," my father agreed. "It is hard to know who is actually running these companies anyway. Shadowy figures, kids in hoodies." "Precisely," Lucas said, warming to his theme. "Take that company everyone is whispering about this week. Apexion. Have you heard of them?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I carefully placed my teacup back on the saucer, ensuring it didn't rattle. "Apexion," my father mused. "The name sounds familiar. Didn't they just have some government contract news?" "Rumors," Lucas corrected, his tone knowledgeable and condescending. "Supposedly they solved the grid stability issue in the Midwest last week during the ice storms. But nobody knows who the CEO is. It is probably some consortium of foreign investors trying to bypass regulation. If a company is that secretive, Dad, it means they have something to hide. It means the technology is dangerous or it is stolen. If I were you, I would short anything related to them." I stared at my brother. He was currently advising our father to bet against the most robust financial entity in the Western Hemisphere. It was almost tragic. "Dangerous," my mother chimed in, wrinkling her nose. "I don't like the sound of that. Why can't they just stick to oil? We know how oil works." "Progress is messy, Mom," Lucas said, sounding wise. "But smart money stays away from the mess. Smart money waits for the dust to settle." I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him that the dust was gold dust, and he was currently sweeping it into the trash. But the timing wasn't mine to control anymore. Suddenly, the ambient hum of the television changed. The polite orchestral theme music of the documentary segment was abruptly cut off. A jarring, electronic swoosh filled the room, followed by an urgent, rhythmic beating sound. The screen on the wall shifted from a montage of wind turbines to a stark, blood-red background. White block letters slammed onto the screen, pulsing with urgency. Breaking news. The sudden shift in light and sound drew everyone's attention. Even the kids looked up from their iPads. "What is this?" my father asked, annoyed. "Another crisis. Probably a hurricane. Or a war." My mother sighed. "It is always bad news." On the screen, the graphics swirled and settled, revealing the anchor desk. It wasn't the weekend substitute. It was Anderson Cooper. He looked grave. Leaning forward on his desk, papers shuffled in front of him. The chyron beneath him read, "Exclusive the architect of the new energy age revealed." "Good evening," Anderson Cooper's voice filled the room, crisp and serious. "We interrupt our scheduled programming for a developing story that is shaking the foundations of Wall Street and Washington alike. For 5 years, the world has watched the meteoric rise of Apexian biosystems. We have seen their technology stabilize national power grids. We have seen their bio-batteries revolutionize electric transport. But through it all, one question has remained unanswered. Who is pulling the strings? In my pocket, my phone began to vibrate. It wasn't a gentle notification buzz. It was a sustained, angry vibration that rattled against my thigh. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled it out, keeping it below the armrest of the chair. The screen was lit up with a text message from Marcus. My Vice President of Operations, boss, I am so sorry. The embargo broke. Someone at the patent office leaked the DoD filing early. We couldn't stop CNN. They are running the special now. Brace yourself. I stared at the text. My timeline had been moved up. I had planned to tell them myself, to lay it out over dessert. But the universe, it seemed, had a sense of theater. On the screen, Anderson Cooper continued, "Tonight, the mystery ends. CNN has obtained exclusive confirmation regarding the identity of the Apexian founder. This is the individual who, just this morning, signed a $12 billion defense contract that effectively secures American energy independence for the next century. $12 billion, Lucas blurted out, his jaw dropping. That is impossible. That is Lockheed Martin money. Who is it? My father asked, leaning forward. His earlier disinterest vanished. Is it Musk? Is it Bezos? My mother, however, had reached her limit. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, reaching for the remote control that sat on the coffee table. I don't want to watch this. It is Christmas. We should be listening to music. Catherine, didn't you say there was a lovely choir performance on PBS? Yes, the Boston Pops, Catherine agreed. It would be much nicer than all this serious talk. Look at the children. They are getting bored. I am changing it, my mother announced, her hand hovering over the remote. Let's find something festive. The remote was inches from her manicured fingers. On the screen, a graphic was building, a digital silhouette slowly filling in with details. My blood ran cold. If she changed the channel now, the moment would pass. They would miss it. They would go back to their tea and their ignorance, and I would have to shout over the sound of jingle bells to be heard. I didn't think, I reacted. Leave it. The voice that came out of my throat was not the voice of Riley, the disappointment. It wasn't the voice of the daughter who walked dogs and lived in a dangerous neighborhood. It was the voice I used to silence boardrooms. It was the voice that had negotiated with prime ministers and generals. It was a tone of absolute, unquestionable command, stripped of all emotion, cold as liquid nitrogen. The effect was instantaneous. My mother's hand froze in midair. Her fingers curled like a claw over the remote. She didn't press the button. She turned her head slowly to look at me, her eyes wide with shock. My father, who had been reaching for his brandy, stopped with his glass halfway to his mouth. He blinked, looking at me as if a stranger had just materialized in his living room. Lucas turned around on the sofa, his eyebrows raised. "Excuse me," he said, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "Since when do you give orders, Riley?" I didn't look at Lucas. I didn't look at my mother. I kept my eyes locked on the television screen, my posture rigid, my face unreadable. I said, I repeated, enunciating every syllable with terrifying precision, "Do not touch that remote. Leave it on that channel." The room fell into a silence that was deeper and more profound than any we had experienced that evening. It was the silence of fear. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking at me with pity or disdain. They were looking at me with confusion, and underneath that confusion, the creeping realization that something was terribly, terribly wrong with their understanding of the world. My mother slowly withdrew her hand from the remote, pulling it back to her chest as if the device had burned her. She didn't argue. She didn't scold me for my tone. She simply sat back, her eyes darting between me and the television. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Okay, Riley, it is on. On the screen. Anderson Cooper looked into the camera. The background turned a deep, regal blue. She has been called a phantom, Cooper said. She has been called the modern Tesla. She has refused every interview request for the last 5 years, choosing to let her work speak for itself. But tonight, she steps out of the shadows. The silhouette on the screen began to dissolve. I sat back in my chair, crossing my legs. I took another sip of my tea. The china felt cool against my lip. "Watch closely," I said to my family, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "You might learn something about investment strategy." "Lucas." My father turned to look at the screen. Lucas turned. Catherine turned. Even the children looked up. The image on the 85-inch screen sharpened. The suspense was over. The truth was about to hit them with the force of a freight train. The image on the television screen shifted from the studio anchor desk to a sweeping, high-definition aerial shot that looked less like a news report and more like the opening scene of a summer blockbuster. The camera panned over a sprawling, futuristic campus nestled in the golden hills of Silicon Valley. It was a masterpiece of glass and sustainable timber, shaped like a series of interlocking honeycombs, glistening under the California sun. Solar panels covered every inch of the roof, shimmering like dragon scales. "This is the Citadel," Anderson Cooper's voiceover narrated, his tone thick with reverence. "The headquarters of Apexion Biosystems. For the last 3 years, this facility has been more secure than the Pentagon. No cameras were allowed inside, no journalists were granted clearance. Until today." The camera cut to a ground-level shot. It moved through a sleek, white lobby that made the Apple Park look cluttered. Men and women in lab coats moved with purposeful strides, carrying tablets and interacting with holographic displays floating in midair. Lucas, who had been frozen in a half-turn toward the television, let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. As an architect, he couldn't help himself. "That structure," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "The cantilever on the north wing. That is impossible engineering. Who designed that?" "The design was conceived by the founder herself," Cooper continued, answering the question before Lucas could finish asking it. "A woman who holds patents not just in chemical engineering, but in structural dynamics." The screen cut back to the studio. Cooper leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the camera lens, and by extension, locking onto the soul of everyone in the Windermere living room. "She has been described by her competitors as a phantom and by her employees as a force of nature. She has refused every interview, every gala invitation, and every magazine cover for 5 years. She preferred to work in the dark so she could bring us the light. But tonight, with the ink drying on the largest defense energy contract in American history, she has finally agreed to step forward." The room was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. 3 rooms away, the tension was a physical weight, pressing down on the chest. My mother was clutching the remote so hard her knuckles were white. My father's mouth was slightly open, a sliver of gold filling visible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cooper said, "the architect of the perpetual bio battery, the CEO of Apexion, Riley Windermere." The screen didn't just change, it exploded with presence. A professional portrait filled the entire 85-inch display. It was a black-and-white photograph, stark and artistic. In the photo, I was wearing a bespoke Italian suit, cut sharp enough to draw blood. My arms were crossed, displaying the Patek Philippe watch that was currently sitting in a vault. My hair was styled in a sleek, powerful bob, but it was the eyes that dominated the screen. In the photo, my eyes were cold, calculating, and fiercely intelligent. They were the eyes of a predator who had already eaten and was merely playing with the bones. It was a jarring, violent contrast to the woman sitting on the ottoman in a pilled thrift store sweater. The Riley on the screen was a titan. The Riley in the room was a charity case, and yet, they were undeniably the same face. The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, then came the crash. My mother's hand, which had been holding a crystal goblet of Pinot Noir, simply went limp. The neurological connection between her brain and her fingers seemed to sever instantly. The glass fell. It hit the edge of the marble coffee table, shattering into a dozen jagged shards before tumbling to the expensive Persian rug. Red wine splashed outward like a crime scene, soaking into the cream-colored wool. Usually, this would be a catastrophe. My mother was a woman who would have a nervous breakdown over a water ring on a coaster, but now, she didn't even blink. She didn't look at the mess. She stared at the television, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. Her face draining of color until she looked like a wax statue. "Riley," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a malfunction. Lucas was the next to react. He looked from the television to me, then back to the television, his head swiveling with the mechanical jerkiness of a broken toy. His brain was trying to reconcile two impossible realities. He looked at the resume guide on my lap. He looked at the Titan on the screen. "What?" Lucas choked out. The word came out as a squeak. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder, but with no more coherence. "What the hell is this?" "It is a broadcast, Lucas," I said softly, my voice calm amidst the chaos. "I believe they are talking about the future." On the screen, the image changed to a video clip. It was footage of me walking down the corridor of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., flanked by 4 men in dark suits with earpieces. I was walking fast, talking to a 4-star general who was struggling to keep up with me. Anderson Cooper's voice continued, relentless. "This morning, the Department of Defense confirmed the acquisition of Apexion's solid-state grid technology. The contract is valued at $12 billion over 5 years. My father stood up. He didn't stand up slowly. He shot up from his leather armchair as if he had been electrocuted. His knees knocked against the coffee table, rattling the tray of untouched cookies. $12 billion, he shouted. It wasn't a happy shout. It was the shout of a man who has just watched the laws of physics invert in front of his eyes. Did he say $12 billion? With a B? Robert, my mother stammered, finally looking down at the wine stains spreading on the rug, though she still didn't seem to comprehend it. He said billion. That is impossible, Lucas yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the TV. That is fake. That is a deep fake. Someone is pranking us. Riley, did you hire someone to make this? Is this some sick joke? Lucas, sit down, I said. I didn't raise my voice, but the command whipped across the room like a lash. He didn't sit. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. You live in a taqueria. You drive a Ford. You accepted the coupons. I accepted your judgment, I corrected. There is a difference. The television cut to a round table of economic experts, a woman with gray hair and glasses, identified as a senior analyst from Bloomberg, was speaking. We have to understand the scale of what Miss Windermere has achieved, the analyst said, her voice breathless with admiration. She didn't just invent a better battery. She reinvented the supply chain. She bypassed the lithium dependency entirely. This is the biggest leap in energy since the discovery of oil. We are looking at a net worth that, as of the market closing today, is conservatively estimated at over $3 billion, and that is just her equity stake. It does not include her intellectual property royalties. $3 billion, my father repeated. He sank back down into his chair, not because he wanted to, but because his legs gave out. He looked pale, gray, and suddenly very old. He looked at the check for $3,000 that was still sitting on the table. Right next to the wine stain. 3,000. $3 billion. The math was doing violence to his ego. He was a man who defined himself by his provider status. He was the patriarch. He was the sun around which we all orbited. And in the span of 2 minutes, he had discovered that he was nothing more than a candle next to a supernova. She is a genius, another pundit on the TV said, a man from the Wall Street Journal. I don't use that word lightly. We are talking about a Steve Jobs level of vision, maybe greater. Jobs sold phones. Windermere is selling survival. And the fact that she did it all while flying completely under the radar It is tactical brilliance. She avoided the hype cycle. She avoided the vultures. She built a fortress in silence. Tactical brilliance, my father whispered. He looked at me. His eyes were searching my face, looking for the daughter he thought he knew, the one he had advised to work in a mailroom. He couldn't find her. She was gone. You knew, my mother gasped, looking at me with a sudden, horrifying clarity. When I gave you that money, when I told you about the neighbors, you knew you could buy the entire neighborhood. I did, I said. And you let me, she said, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. You let me sit there and give you coupons. You let me embarrass myself. Why would you do that? I didn't make you do anything, Mom, I said. I just let you be yourself. I let you show me exactly who you are. Catherine, who had been silent until now, clutching her diamond bracelet as if it were a lifeline, finally spoke. But the apartment, the bad neighborhood, you said you liked the vibrancy. I own the building. Catherine, I said, bored with the charade. I own the block. The bad neighborhood is an incubation hub for my junior engineers. That bodega downstairs, I bought it for the family who runs it, so they wouldn't get priced out by gentrification. It is called community building. You wouldn't understand. It doesn't come with a gate code. On the screen, the segment was ending. Anderson Cooper was back. Riley Windermere, a name you will be hearing for the rest of your life, a local girl from Greenwich, Connecticut, who has arguably become the most powerful woman in the world. The room was silent again. The broadcast moved on to a commercial for a luxury sedan, the kind my father drove, the kind that now seemed like a toy compared to the empire described on the screen. The silence was thick, suffocating, and filled with the debris of shattered assumptions. They were waiting for me to scream, to gloat, to flip the table. They were waiting for an explosion. Instead, I reached forward. My movements were slow and deliberate. I picked up a shortbread cookie from the silver tray on the table. It was a festive shape, a star dusted with sugar. I brought it to my lips. I took a bite. Snap. The sound of the crisp cookie breaking was loud in the dead air. It was a sharp, dry crack that sounded like a bone snapping. I chewed slowly, looking from my mother's terrified face to my father's defeated slump, to Lucas's gaping mouth. I swallowed. These are a little dry. Mom, I said, brushing a crumb from my thrift store sweater. Next year, maybe use a little more butter. I leaned back, crossing my legs, looking at the television where my real face was still lingering in the corner graphic. The power shift was complete. The air in the room no longer belonged to them. It was mine. Every molecule of oxygen they breathed now felt like a gift I was graciously allowing them to consume. So, I said, turning my gaze to Lucas, tell me more about those energy bonds you were recommending. I am fascinated by your expertise. The broadcast cut from the studio to a live feed from Capitol Hill. Senator Sterling, a man who had spent the last decade aggressively lobbying against renewable subsidies, was now standing at a podium, looking grave and patriotic. He was surrounded by microphones, the seal of the Senate behind him adding a weight of officialdom to his words. This is not just a technological breakthrough, the senator intoned, his voice booming through our living room speakers. This is a matter of American sovereignty. For too long, we have been beholden to foreign powers for our energy supply, but with the deployment of the Apexian grid systems, we are looking at total independence. I have reviewed the classified briefings. I have seen the data. This company is the future of national security. In the corner of the room, the silence was finally broken by the frantic tapping of glass. Lucas had pulled out his phone. He was not texting. He was searching. His thumbs moved with a desperate, jerky speed, the backlight of the screen illuminating the sweat that had beaded on his upper lip. He wasn't looking for market trends anymore. He was looking for me. This is insane, Lucas muttered, his voice cracking. This has to be a mistake. A name mix-up. He hit the search button. I knew exactly what he was seeing. I had curated the release of information myself. At exactly 4:30, My digital team had lifted the firewall on the search engine optimization protocols we had suppressed for years. 0.5 seconds, Lucas whispered, staring at his phone as if it were a bomb. 42 million results. What? Catherine asked, leaning over his shoulder, her diamond bracelet clinking against the buttons of his coat. I typed in her name, Lucas said, looking up at me with eyes that were wide and glassy. Just Riley Windermere, 42 million results generated in half a second. Yesterday, you couldn't find her in the white pages. He tapped the first link. It wasn't a blog. It wasn't a local news story. It was Bloomberg Terminal's top dossier. Catherine snatched the phone from his hand, her eyes scanning the small screen frantically. She began to read aloud, her voice trembling, stripping away the privacy I had maintained for so long. Riley Windermere, founder and CEO. Catherine read, primary shareholder, ownership stake. Wait, this cannot be right. She looked up at me, blinking rapidly. It says she retains 80% of the voting stock. My father let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. 80%. After 5 rounds of funding, that is impossible. The dilution alone would have brought her down to 15. Maybe 20%. No venture capitalist lets a founder keep 80%. They do when the founder doesn't need their money, I said. My voice was calm, cutting through their panic like a scalpel. I didn't take Series A funding until the prototype was fully functional. I dictated the terms. Dad, I didn't ask for permission. I sold them non-voting shares. I own the company. I control the board. I am the board. Catherine ignored me, scrolling further down the page. Assets, she read. Notable acquisitions. Last month, Apexion Land Trust purchased the island of Niihau's neighbor. Wait, you bought a Hawaiian island for $300 million. It is a conservation project, I corrected, taking another sip of my tea. We are restoring the native flora and using the microclimate to test salt air corrosion on the battery casings. It is not a vacation home. Catherine, it is a laboratory that happens to have a beach. 300 million, Lucas repeated, the number rolling out of his mouth like a curse word. He looked at his golf clubs, his gold-plated, $20,000 golf clubs leaning against the sofa. They suddenly looked like cheap toys. You spent $300 million on a lab, and you let us pay for dinner. I offered to split the bill last time, I reminded him. You told me to save my pennies for the laundromat. My mother was shaking. She wasn't looking at the TV anymore. She was looking at the coffee table. Specifically, at the envelope containing the check for $3,000. The check she had handed me with such performative charity just 20 minutes ago. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the edge of the envelope, as if checking to see if it was real. But you said, she stammered, her eyes filling with tears of confusion and humiliation. You said you were struggling. You came here in that terrible car. You are wearing that old sweater with the fuzz on the elbows. You told me you were working on a project. I told you I was building an ecosystem, I said. I told you I was focused on sustainable growth. I told you I didn't care about material displays of wealth. I never once used the word poor. Mom, I never said destitute. You looked at my sweater and you filled in the blanks. You saw what you wanted to see because it made you feel superior. We were trying to help, she cried out, her voice shrill. We thought you were a failure. How are we supposed to know who hides billions of dollars? Who does that? Someone who wants to know if her family loves her or just loves her success, I replied. The room went dead silent again. And I think we have gathered ample data on that subject tonight. My father stood up again, pacing the small rug in front of his chair. He looked like a man whose world was spinning off its axis. He was a lawyer, a man of logic, and the logic of his life had just been dismantled. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, pointing a finger at me. Riley, I am a corporate attorney. I spent 40 years in contract law. If I had known. Do you have any idea how much I could have helped you? The liability structures, the patent filings. I could have been your general counsel. I could have protected you. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. It wasn't fear for my safety. It was the fear of irrelevance. He wanted to be needed. He wanted to be the architect of my success so he could claim it. I let a small, dry laugh escape my lips. "Counsel," I asked. "Dad, 10 minutes ago, you asked Lucas to find me a job as a secretary. You sat there and told me I wasn't smart enough to handle the pressure of a 9-to-5 office job. You thought I needed a book on how to write a resume. That was different," he spluttered, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "I thought you were aimless if I had known you were running a corporation. If you knew I was running a corporation, you would have tried to take it over," I said. "And frankly, Dad, you are not qualified." "Not qualified." He bristled, his chest puffing out. "I was a partner at Davis Polk." "You handled estate planning and mid-level commercial disputes," I said, reciting his resume from memory. "My legal team is led by the former Attorney General of the United States. My mergers and acquisitions are handled by the top 3 partners at Goldman Sachs. We are dealing with international trade laws, Department of Defense clearances, and multi-jurisdictional patent enforcement in 14 countries. With all due respect, Dad, you wouldn't make it past the first round of interviews for a paralegal position at my firm." It was cruel, it was brutal, and it was the absolute truth. He recoiled as if I had slapped him. He sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing. No words coming out. The Wall Street Journal he had been reading earlier lay on the floor, forgotten. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the world had moved on without him, and his daughter was the one leading the charge. "Look!" Catherine shrieked. Pointing at the television again, the broadcast had shifted. Anderson Cooper was no longer speaking. The screen was showing footage from a closed-door event earlier that morning. The chyron read, "Oval Office Signing Ceremony. Declassified footage." The camera angle was from the side, capturing the heavy curtains and the iconic Resolute desk. The President of the United States was sitting there, pen in hand. Standing next to him, leaning over the desk to point at a clause in the document, was me. But it wasn't just the proximity, it was the dynamic, in the video. The President looked up at me and asked a question. I answered, gesturing firmly with my hand. The President nodded, looking almost deferential. He signed the document, stood up, and extended his hand. The Riley on the screen took the President's hand, not with the gratitude of a subject, but with the firmness of an equal partner. "Thank you, Madam CEO." The audio picked up the President's voice clearly. "You have done a great service to the Republic today. We are just getting started. Mr. President," the Riley on the screen replied. The footage froze on that handshake. The contrast was visceral, on the screen. I was standing in the center of global power, shaping the geopolitical landscape. In the living room, I was sitting on a footstool, surrounded by people who thought I wasn't capable of paying my own rent. Lucas looked at the TV, then at me. He looked terrified. "You know the President," Lucas whispered. "You actually know him." "We have met 4 times, I said, nonchalantly brushing a piece of lint from my jeans. "He is very interested in the lithium-sulfur density metrics. He is surprisingly tech-savvy." "I met the mayor of Greenwich once," Lucas murmured, his voice hollow. He shook my hand at the ribbon cutting for the mall. "That is nice, Lucas," I said. "Local politics are important too." My mother was weeping now. Soft, quiet sobs. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for the narrative she had lost. She was crying because the story she told her friends at the country club, the story of her successful son and her wayward, charity case daughter, was a lie. And worse, it was a lie that made her look like a fool. $3 billion, my father whispered again, his eyes fixed on the frozen image of the handshake. "And 80% equity, that is $2.4 billion liquid. Give or take a few $100 million depending on the market fluctuation today," I added. "Though with this news cycle, the valuation is likely climbing as we speak. I expect the IPO projections to double by tomorrow morning." I stood up. The movement made them all jump. They looked at me as if I were a loaded weapon that had just clicked off the safety. "I think I need a refill on my tea," I said, walking past the stunned group toward the silver service on the side table. "All this talking about money makes one thirsty. Don't you agree, Dad?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. He was staring at the coupon book for canned beans that was still sitting on the ottoman where I had left it. It lay there, a ridiculous artifact of a reality that no longer existed, mocking him with its offer of 50 cents off. The silence that had gripped the room following the broadcast was shattered not by a human voice, but by a digital symphony. It started with a single chirp from my father's pocket. Then, Lucas's phone on the coffee table lit up and began to vibrate violently against the glass. Catherine's purse, sitting on the floor, began to ring with a cheerful, melodic tune that sounded grotesque in the heavy atmosphere. Even my mother's phone, tucked away in the kitchen, could be heard buzzing against the granite countertop. The outside world had caught up. For years, the Windermere name had been associated with my father's legal practice, or Lucas's architectural firm respectable, upper-middle-class achievements. But tonight, the name had been broadcast to 300 million people as the label for a new dynasty. The Sharks, the Sycophants, the long-lost cousins, and the jealous neighbors were all calling at once. They wanted confirmation. They wanted proximity to the heat of the supernova that had just exploded in Greenwich. "Make it stop," my father muttered, staring at his chest as if his heart were vibrating. Though it was only his iPhone, he didn't answer it. He couldn't. What would he say? "Yes, my daughter is the billionaire, and I just gave her a coupon for tuna fish." I watched them. I watched the realization settle into their bones like a damp chill. This was the moment the hierarchy inverted. For 3 decades, I had been the runt, the scrap, the one who had to beg for a seat at the table. Now, I owned the table. I owned the house the table sat in. I could buy the timber company that made the table. Lucas was the first to look at me with the new eyes. It was a gaze I had seen before in boardrooms, when a hostile takeover target realized they had no leverage left. It was a cocktail of fear, awe, and a sickly green-tinged jealousy. He was doing the math. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. Lucas was proud of his end-of-year bonus. He had bragged about it for an hour. It was likely around $50,000 or $60,000, a substantial sum for a normal person. But as he looked at me, he realized the terrifying scale of the difference. My company had cleared $12 billion in contracts that morning. My personal quarterly dividend yield, just the cash payout for holding stock, was likely more than his entire net worth, including his mortgage, his 401k, and his gold-plated golf clubs. He wasn't just my brother anymore. Economically speaking, he was my charity case. "You?" Lucas started, his voice dry. He licked his lips. "The island, in Hawaii, you said 300 million?" "The land acquisition was 300 million, I clarified, my tone conversational. "The retrofitting of the research facility cost another 150 million. It was a capital-intensive year." Lucas swallowed hard. He looked at his wife, then back at me. The arrogance that usually held his spine straight had evaporated. He slumped. He looked smaller. The physical space he occupied in the room seemed to shrink as mine expanded. He realized that every piece of advice he had given me over dinner about stability, about markets, about real jobs, had been the babbling of a child lecturing a professor. Then came the pivot. Catherine, who had spent the evening treating me like a contagion she didn't want to catch, suddenly shifted in her seat. Her body language transformed. She uncrossed her arms and leaned forward, her face rearranging itself into a mask of intimate sisterhood. "Oh, Riley," she breathed, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that made my teeth ache. She reached out a hand as if to touch my knee, though I was too far away. "I knew it. I just knew it." I raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my tea. "You knew what, Catherine?" "I knew you were special," she insisted, shaking her head with a look of wonder. "I was just telling Lucas the other night. I said, 'Your sister has a spark. She is not like the rest of us. She sees things differently.'" Didn't I say that? Lucas? Lucas didn't answer. He was staring at the floor. And that sweater? Catherine continued, laughing nervously. I get it now. It is so Silicon Valley chic. It is understated. It is confident. You don't need to show off because you are the show. God, I feel so silly for not seeing it sooner. You are just so humble. Riley. She stood up and took a step toward me, clearly intending to hug me, to physically attach herself to the new center of gravity. Sit down, Catherine, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The air in the room obeyed me now. She froze. I just wanted to congratulate you. Sweetie, you just wanted to tell me that my neighborhood was a slum, I reminded her, my voice cutting through her flattery like a laser. You asked if I lived above a bodega. You expressed deep concern that I might be mugged because I couldn't afford a doorman. Don't rewrite history just because the bank balance has changed. It is insulting to my memory. Catherine's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She sank back onto the sofa, pulling her diamond bracelet, the one that suddenly looked like costume jewelry, tight against her wrist. I was just concerned for your safety, she mumbled. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, I said. You assumed. Well, how were we supposed to ask? My mother suddenly cried out. The tears had started. It was her go-to defense mechanism. When she lost control of a situation, she weaponized her emotions. She dabbed at her eyes with a cocktail napkin, the mascara running down her cheeks. You tricked us, Riley, she sobbed, looking at me with accusatory eyes. You sat there and let us make fools of ourselves. You let me give you those coupons. Do you know how that makes me feel? I feel like an idiot. I feel like you set a trap for your own mother. I didn't set a trap. Mom, I said, standing up. I just didn't dismantle the one you built for yourself. But why hide it? She wailed. Why not tell us, Mom, Dad, I started a company. Was that so hard? We would have been happy for you. We would have celebrated you instead. You let us think you were a failure for 3 years. 3 years. Riley. I have been telling my friends at the club that you were finding yourself. I had to lie for you, and all this time. All this time. I was waiting for you to be interested in me, not just my resume, I interrupted, walking slowly toward the center of the room. But you are right about one thing. You think I hid it. You think I kept this massive secret. I stopped in front of the fireplace, turning to face them. I looked at my father, who was still staring blankly at the wall. I didn't hide anything, I said clearly. Bullshit, Lucas snapped, finding a scrap of his old aggression. You are on the cover of a magazine on national television, and we didn't know. How is that not hiding? Because I sent you the magazine, I said. The room went dead silent. What? My father asked, his voice rasping. 6 months ago, I said, pointing a finger toward the corner of the room, near the antique secretaire desk where my father piled his correspondence. Next to the desk was a large woven wicker basket that served as the repository for junk mail, catalogs, and old periodicals. It was a graveyard of unread paper. Forbes released their 30 Under 30 issue. Then, 3 months later, they did the Titans of Industry special. I was the cover story for the latter. I mailed a copy to this house, addressed to Robert and Eleanor Windermere. I put a sticky note on the cover that said, "Thought you might like this." I never saw it, my mother said, shaking her head frantically. I never saw any magazine. It is in the basket, I said. My father looked at the basket. It was overflowing with Uline catalogs, brochures for river cruises, and old copies of The New Yorker. No, he whispered. Go look, I commanded. My father stood up. He walked across the room, his movements heavy and old. He reached the basket. He hesitated for a second, then knelt down. It was a degrading image, the patriarch of the family, kneeling on the floor, digging through his own trash to find the proof of his daughter's success. He tossed aside a catalog for lawn furniture. He moved a stack of political mailers. He dug deeper, past the layers of neglect. It should be near the bottom, I instructed, watching him without pity. Still in the plastic wrap, you never even opened it. He pulled out a thick, glossy magazine. It was still sealed in its clear plastic mailing envelope. The address label was white and crisp, the Windermere family, 12 Oak Ridge Drive. My father's hands shook as he tore the plastic open. He pulled the magazine out. He turned it over. There, on the cover, was a stylized, artistic shot of me standing in front of a wall of blue bioluminescent cells. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking up, toward a light source, my profile sharp and determined. The headline was in bold. Gold foil letters, The Energy Queen. How Riley Windermere Solved the Impossible. My father stared at the cover. He traced the letters of my name with his thumb. "It was here," he whispered. "It was here the whole time." "I sent it via FedEx," I said. "Mom signed for it," my mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That package, I thought it was just another alumni magazine from your father's law school. I didn't look at the return address." "You didn't look because you didn't care," I said. "You saw a package for me, or from me, and you assumed it was irrelevant. You assumed it was a plea for money, or a piece of art I made, or something else you could ignore. You didn't open it because in your mind, nothing important could ever come from Riley." Lucas stood up and walked over to look over our father's shoulder. He stared at the magazine cover. He read the sub-headline aloud. "Apexion's founder turns a garage experiment into a $3 billion empire without taking a dime of Wall Street money." Lucas looked up at me. "You sent this to us. You actually tried to tell us." "I tried," I said. "I tried to tell you at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and you called it a pyramid scheme. I tried to send you the press clippings, and they ended up in the trash. I tried to tell you tonight, in the car, and Mom criticized my sweater. The evidence has been screaming in your face for years, but your prejudice was louder." I walked over to the table and picked up the check for $3,000. I held it up next to the magazine cover that my father was clutching like a holy relic. "This is the difference," I said. "This check is what you think I am worth. That magazine is what the world knows I am worth. The tragedy isn't that I hid the truth. The tragedy is that you were holding the truth in your hands, and you threw it in the recycling bin because it didn't fit the story you wanted to tell about me." My father looked up from the magazine. His eyes were red. He looked broken. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a daughter he needed to fix. He was looking at a stranger who had surpassed him in every metric he valued. And he realized he had missed the entire journey. "Riley," he choked out. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected. The phone in his pocket rang again. This time, he didn't ignore it. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. "It is Judge Holloway," he said, his voice weak. "He probably saw the news." "You should answer it," I said, my voice cold. "Tell him yes, that is your daughter, and tell him no, you had absolutely nothing to do with it." My father let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. He couldn't face the congratulations. He knew they were unearned. He dropped the magazine onto the desk, but the cover remained face up, my image staring accusingly at the ceiling. "Now," I said, checking my imaginary watch, though my wrist was bare. "I believe the president mentioned something about a briefing tomorrow. I have a helicopter landing in 20 minutes. We should probably wrap this up. I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome." "Helicopter," my mother squeaked. "Here." "It is landing on the back lawn," I said. "I hope you don't mind. It might blow some of the snow off your prized rose bushes, but don't worry. I can afford to replace them." I turned away from them, walking toward the window to look out at the dark, snowy night. I could hear the faint thrumming of rotors in the distance. My escape was coming. The status shift was complete. I wasn't just the alpha. I was a different species entirely, and the enclosure they had built for me was far, far too small. The polite, Westminster chime of the front doorbell did not just ring, it assaulted us. It began as the standard two-tone melody, a sound designed to announce the arrival of a package or a dinner guest. but it was immediately trampled by a frantic, staccato pounding that echoed through the foyer like a drumbeat of war. Then came the light. It started as a single pulse, a white-hot strobe flashing against the heavy velvet drapes of the living room window, then another, then a dozen more, firing in rapid succession until the gap between the curtains looked like a disco strobe light was malfunctioning on the front lawn. It was not lightning. It was the synchronized shutter release of 20 high-speed cameras. "What in God's name is that?" my father shouted, his voice cracking with a panic I had never heard before. He looked at the window as if it were about to shatter. "Is it the police? Is it a raid?" "It is the court of public opinion, Dad," I said, sliding my phone out of my pocket. "And you are currently the main attraction." My mother ran to the window, her instinct to inspect overcoming her fear. She pulled back the edge of the heavy drape just an inch. The room was instantly flooded with a blinding glare. "Oh my God," she gasped, shrinking back as if physically struck. "There are people. There are hundreds of people. And vans. There are trucks with satellite dishes parked on the lawn. They are crushing the azaleas." I walked over to the window, standing just out of sight, and peered through the crack my mother had created. The quiet, exclusive cul-de-sac of Greenwich had been transformed into a media circus. News vans from New York City, having likely broken every speed limit on I-95 to get here after the CNN broadcast, were jamming the street. But it wasn't just the press. It was the neighbors. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the woman my mother had been so terrified of offending, standing by the wrought iron gate. She was wearing a fur coat over her pajamas, holding a bottle of champagne, waving it at the house like a lunatic. I saw the Johnsons from down the street, the ones who had made a snide comment about my rental car when I arrived. They were holding up their phones, live streaming themselves in front of my parents' front door. They weren't there to judge anymore. They were there to touch the hem of the garment. They were there to claim proximity to the $12 billion. "They are chanting," Lucas said, his face pressed against the glass in the dining room archway. "Listen, they are chanting your name. Riley, Rayleigh. Riley." The sound was muffled by the triple-paned glass, but it was unmistakable. It was the low, hungry roar of a mob that wanted a piece of the magic. "We have to open the door," my father stammered, smoothing his hair frantically. His conditioned reflex as a host was kicking in, fighting a losing battle against his terror. "We can't just leave them out there. Mrs. Higgins is there. The press, we need to offer them coffee. Eleanor, do we have enough coffee? The house is a mess. The wine on the rug. We can't let them see the rug." He was spiraling, obsessing over etiquette while a siege was taking place. He was worried about beverage service when he should have been worried about perimeter integrity. "Sit down, Dad," I said. My voice was no longer the voice of a daughter. It was the voice of the asset. I unlocked my phone. I didn't dial 911. 911 would take 10 minutes and send 2 officers who would ask for autographs. I tapped the icon for the Apexion Global Security Operations Center. "Code red," I said into the phone the second the line opened. "Location is the Windermere residence, Greenwich. I have a hostile media containment breach. Tier 1 swarm. I need the driveway cleared and a sterile corridor established for extraction. ETA on the bird." The family stared at me. They watched as I paced the Persian rug, stepping over the wine stain my mother was fretting about. "Copy that," I said, listening to the voice of my head of security, a former Navy SEAL named Marcus. 10 minutes is too long. You have 6. I want the local PD liaison to shut down the street at the intersection, no more vehicles in, and get the private contractors to push the crowd back to the public easement. If anyone steps on the porch, I want them removed. Non-lethal. But make it firm." I hung up. "Non-lethal," my mother whispered, clutching her pearl necklace. "Riley, you are talking about Mrs. Higgins. You can't have security remove Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins is currently trespassing on private property with an intoxicating substance," I said, checking the time on my screen. "And if she doesn't move when the helicopter lands, The downdraft is going to blow that fur coat right off her back. Helicopter? Lucas asked, his eyes darting around the room. You were serious. You are landing a chopper here in the backyard. The HOA will sue us into oblivion. Riley, there are noise ordinances. I looked at my brother. He was sweating. He was still thinking in terms of homeowners association bylaws and polite society rules. He didn't understand that when you control a significant percentage of the national energy grid, noise ordinances are just suggestions. I bought the HOA debt 3 months ago through a shell company, I said, not bothering to look at him. Technically, I am the HOA, and I'm granting myself a variance. The pounding on the door grew louder. Someone was shouting, Riley, just one photo, a statement for the Gazette. We have to do something, Lucas said, stepping forward, his chest puffing out in a pathetic attempt to regain control. He adjusted his tie, the same tie he had worn to impress me with his bonus earlier. Riley, listen to me. I know how to handle clients. I know how to handle the public. You cannot just hide in here. It looks arrogant. It looks guilty. Guilty of what? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Success. It looks aloof, Lucas insisted, waving his hands. You need to control the narrative. You should go out there. Just for a minute. Step onto the porch. Wave. Smile. Be the hometown girl made good. Show them you are humble. If you send out goons to push them back, the headlines tomorrow will be Billionaire snubs childhood neighbors. You don't want that. He looked at me with a desperate hope. Thinking he had finally found an area where he could mentor me, he wanted to be the PR strategist. He wanted to be the wise older brother guiding the naive lottery winner. I walked over to him. I stopped 2 inches from his face. I was shorter than him, but in that moment, I towered over him. Lucas, I said, my voice drop-dead calm. You design mid-range commercial office parks. You worry about whether the lobby lighting is welcoming. Do not presume to tell me how to handle global media. I am just saying, you are saying I should wave. I cut him off. Let me explain something to you. If I walk out that door and wave, the market algorithms interpret that as confidence. The stock spikes. If I trip on the doormat, the stock drops 2 points. If I frown, speculation starts about a regulatory investigation. My face is not a face anymore. Lucas, it is a ticker symbol. A friendly wave to Mrs. Higgins could trigger an automated sell-off in Tokyo if the AI misinterprets my micro-expressions. Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a fish gasping for air. I do not have the luxury of being the hometown girl, I continued, relentless. I am a $12 billion volatility index, so no, I will not be going out there to shake hands with people who ignored me for a decade. I will not be giving them a photo op to sell to TMZ. I am leaving, on my terms. The sound of sirens cut through the chanting outside, not the polite whoop-whoop of a patrol car, but the heavy, air-shredding wail of armored escorts. My phone buzzed. Perimeter breach sealed. Extraction team inbound. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, I announced to the room. The team is here. My father was standing by the fireplace, holding the poker as if he intended to defend the castle from the barbarian horde. He looked at me, his eyes wide and glassy. Who are you? He whispered. You look like my daughter. You sound like my daughter, but my daughter walks dogs. Your daughter runs the world. Dad, I said, picking up my purse. You just never bothered to ask her about her day. The lights outside shifted. The flashing cameras were suddenly drowned out by sweeping white floodlights. I heard the crunch of heavy tires on the gravel driveway, the sound of large, black SUVs forcing their way through the crowd. The chanting turned into confused shouting as the professionals took over. Move back. Step away from the gate. Back now. The authority in those voices was absolute. It wasn't the local police asking nicely. It was private military contractors earning their retainer. They are hurting them, my mother cried, looking out the window again. They are pushing the Johnsons. Oh my God, They just shoved Mrs. Higgins back into the hedge. She will survive, I said. It is a soft hedge. The back door of the house, the sliding glass door that led to the patio and the sprawling lawn suddenly vibrated. A low thumping sound began to build in the air. It was a rhythmic whoop, whoop, whoop that you felt in your chest before you heard it with your ears. The china in the cabinet began to rattle. The crystal chandelier above the dining table started to sway, chiming softly. "What is happening to the house?" my father yelled, dropping the fireplace poker. Clang. "Extraction," I said. I turned to the sliding glass doors. Beyond the patio, the dark night sky was suddenly pierced by a searchlight beam. A sleek black helicopter was descending onto the back lawn, its rotors kicking up a miniature blizzard of snow. The wind hit the house, rattling the windows in their frames. The prized rose bushes my mother had tended for 20 years were flattened in an instant, stripped of their winter coverings, looking like sticks in a hurricane. "My roses!" my mother screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the turbine. "I will send a landscaper tomorrow," I shouted over the noise. "A team of them, best in the state." The helicopter touched down, its landing skids sinking into the frozen grass. The side door slid open. 2 men jumped out. They were dressed in black tactical gear, wearing headsets and carrying rifles that were definitely not for hunting deer. They sprinted toward the back door of the house, moving with a fluid, lethal grace. My father backed away, bumping into the wall. "Guns. Why do they have guns, Riley? Are you in trouble? Are you a criminal?" "They are for my protection." "Dad," I said, walking toward the back door. "When you carry the codes to the national power grid in your head, people want to crack it open. These men make sure that doesn't happen." One of the guards reached the glass door. He didn't knock. He signaled to me. I unlocked it and slid it open. The cold air rushed in, smelling of aviation fuel and ozone. The noise was deafening now. "Principal secure," the guard shouted, his voice fighting the rotor wash. "Ready to move," I shouted back. I turned to look at my family one last time before the chaos swallowed me completely. They were huddled together in the center of the living room. A tableau of fear and confusion, my mother clutching her pearls, my father looking old and small, Lucas holding his wife, his arrogance stripped away, leaving him naked and shivering. They looked like refugees in their own home. "You should probably close the drapes," I yelled to them, my hair whipping around my face. "The press will try to circle around back once they hear the chopper. You have about 30 seconds before the paparazzi are in the flower beds." "Riley," my mother cried out, taking a step toward me, her hand outstretched. "Where are you going? It is Christmas. You can't leave. We haven't had dessert." "I have a meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff at 0800, I said, "and frankly, I have lost my appetite." "Wait," Lucas shouted, running forward a few steps, fighting the wind. "Riley, the stock, the IPO. Can I get in on the friends and family round? Just tell me who to call." I looked at him, even now, with armed guards in his backyard and a helicopter tearing up the lawn. He was looking for an angle. He was looking for the scraps. "Buy retail. Lucas," I shouted back, a cold smile touching my lips. Like everyone else, I turned and stepped out into the freezing night. The guard flanked me, shielding my body with his own. I walked toward the waiting machine, the snow crunching under my boots, the wind tearing at my clothes. Behind me, the warm golden glow of the Windermere mansion looked like a dollhouse, a small, fragile thing that I had outgrown a long, long time ago. I climbed into the cabin of the helicopter. The leather seat was warm. The door slid shut, cutting off the noise, cutting off the cold, and cutting off the family that had never known me. "Go," I said into the headset. The machine lifted. The ground fell away. And as I looked down, I saw the flashing lights of the cameras swarming the front of the house, a sea of vultures picking at the carcass of my former life. The chaos outside had been surgically removed. My security team, efficient as ever, had established a perimeter so tight that even the sound of the chanting mob had been reduced to a dull, distant hum, The only pervasive sound remaining was the rhythmic, low-frequency thrum of the Sikorsky helicopter idling on the back lawn. A heartbeat of pure power that vibrated through the floorboards of the house. Inside the living room, the air had changed quality. The frantic energy of the revelation and the panic of the siege had evaporated, leaving behind something far heavier and harder to breathe: shame. It settled over the furniture like dust. It coated the throat. My father sat on the edge of the sofa. His posture collapsed. He looked 10 years older than he had when I walked in the door. His hands, usually so steady when holding a gavel or a Scotch glass, were trembling. He stared at the coffee table. Specifically, he was staring at the envelope containing the check for $3,000. The envelope sat there, white and crisp, right next to the drying stain of the spilled Pinot Noir. It looked ridiculous now. It looked like a joke, slowly, with a movement that seemed physically painful. My father reached out. He placed 2 fingers on the edge of the envelope and pushed it away. He didn't just move it. He shoved it across the mahogany surface until it teetered on the edge and fell onto the carpet with a soft whisper. He couldn't bear to look at it. That piece of paper, which he had intended as a symbol of his benevolence, had transformed into the physical evidence of his humiliation. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was a wreck. It was raspy, stripped of its booming courtroom authority. He didn't look up. He addressed his shiny wingtip shoes. "Your mother and I were wrong. We made assumptions. We were blind." He took a shuddering breath. "We are proud of you, Riley. You have to know that. We are so incredibly proud." I stood by the fireplace, my coat buttoned, my gloves in my hand. I looked at him, searching for a flicker of emotion in my own chest. I waited to feel relief. I waited to feel the warmth of validation I had craved since I was 6 years old. I felt nothing. It was like reaching into a hearth expecting fire and finding only cold ash. "Proud," I repeated, the word tasting flat. "That is a heavy word, Dad. I am curious about the parameters." He finally looked up, his eyes wet and red-rimmed. "What? Are you proud because I am Riley?" I asked, my voice soft but filling the silence of the room. "Are you proud of the daughter who sat in this room an hour ago? The one you thought was failing? Or are you proud of the woman Anderson Cooper just called a genius? Are you proud of my character? Or are you proud of the ticker symbol scrolling at the bottom of the CNN screen?" "It is not like that," he protested weakly. Success just shows us what you were capable of. It validates you." "No," I corrected. "Success validated me to strangers. You were supposed to be the ones who didn't need validation. You were supposed to be the ones who saw the value before the market cap did." My mother let out a sound that was half sob, half wail. She was huddled in the corner of the love seat, clutching a throw pillow to her chest as if it were a shield. Her makeup was ruined, black streaks of mascara cutting jagged paths down her cheeks. "I am your mother," she cried out. "How can you be so cold? We are family. None of this matters. The money, the contracts, the island, none of it matters to me. Riley, I don't care about the billions. I just care about you." I looked at her. I remembered the way she had scanned my outfit in the foyer. I remembered the sigh of disappointment when I mentioned my project. "If the money doesn't matter," I said, walking slowly toward her, "then I have a question, a simple one." She looked up, hope flaring in her eyes, thinking I was offering a bridge. "In the last 3 years," I said, counting the years off on my gloved fingers, "we have had 3 Christmases, 3 Thanksgivings, a dozen phone calls. In all that time, can you remember a single instance where you asked me if I was happy?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her brow furrowed as she searched her memory. "You asked if I had found a job." I continued, relentless. "You asked if I was eating well. You asked if I had met a nice man who could support me. You asked if I needed rent money. You asked if I was safe. But tell me, Mom, did you ever once ask, 'Riley, does your life bring you joy?'" The silence that followed was the answer. You didn't, I answered for her. Because you didn't think a life without status could possibly have joy. You equated my net worth with my self-worth. So please, do not sit there now and tell me the money doesn't matter. The money was the only metric you ever used to measure me. We just wanted you to be secure, she insisted, her voice breaking. Is it a crime for parents to worry? Worrying is love, I said. Diminishing is control. You weren't worried I would starve. Mom, you were worried I would look bad to the neighbors. There is a difference. Lucas cleared his throat. He was standing near the window, watching the security team dismantle the blockade of paparazzi at the gate. He turned around, adjusting his cufflinks. He had composed himself faster than our parents. The shock had worn off, replaced by the opportunistic gleam of a man who sees a sinking ship and spots a lifeboat made of gold. Look, Riley, Lucas said, stepping forward with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. This is getting heavy. Emotions are high. We are all in shock. But let's look at the big picture here. We are family, blood. That means something. He walked over to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of water. Trying to act casual, trying to regain the alpha posture he had lost. Dad and Mom, they are old school, Lucas said, drinking the water and grimacing. They don't get the modern economy, but I do. I get what you are building, and frankly, it is incredible. But you are going to need help. You are going to need people you can trust, not these hired guns. He gestured vaguely toward the back door where my guard stood. Is that so? I asked, leaning against the back of the sofa. Absolutely, Lucas said, warming to his pitch. You have liquid capital now. Serious capital. You can't just leave that sitting in a bank. You need diversification. Real estate. Hard assets. I have been looking at some commercial zoning opportunities in downtown Manhattan. Warehousing. Logistics centers. If we pooled resources, I could manage the family portfolio. I could set up a family office. Windermere Holdings. It has a ring to it. Doesn't it? I stared at him. It was almost impressive. The body of our relationship wasn't even cold yet, and he was already trying to sign a partnership agreement with the executioner. Lucas, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room. Stop. I am just saying, he pressed, a desperate edge entering his voice. I know the market. I can help you tax harvest. I don't need a portfolio manager, I interrupted. And I certainly don't need a partner who advised me 2 hours ago to invest in oil because green energy was a bubble. Lucas flinched. I didn't know it was you. Exactly, I said. You didn't know it was me. You looked at the market and you saw risk. I looked at the market and I saw the future. That is why I am the billionaire, and you are the architect who designs food courts. That is harsh. Riley, he snapped. It is accurate, I replied. But here's the real reason why this is never going to happen. Lucas, listen closely, because I am only going to explain this once. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the resume guide, Resume Writing for Beginners, that was still lying there. I held it up. You are trying to sell me on the idea of family loyalty, I said. You are trying to say that because we share DNA. I owe you a seat at the table. But the truth is, your respect has a price tag. You didn't respect me when I was Riley the dog walker. You only respect me now because I am Riley the Titan. I tossed the book back onto the table. It landed with a thud next to the rejected check. I don't need that kind of love, Lucas, I said. I don't need conditional affection. I don't need a brother who only calls me back when my stock splits. I have investors for that. And frankly, my investors offer better terms than you do. You are being unfair, my mother sobbed. We made you who you are. We gave you your education. We gave you your drive. I laughed then. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. You are absolutely right. Mom, I said, you did make me who I am, but not in the way you think. I looked at the three of them, the father who wanted me to be a secretary, the mother who wanted me to be a housewife, The brother who wanted me to be invisible. I built a affection because of you, I said. Every time you told me to be practical, I took a bigger risk. Every time you told me to settle, I aimed higher. Every time you compared me to Lucas, I worked an extra 4 hours in the lab. My success isn't a tribute to your parenting, it is a reaction to it. I became the most powerful woman in the world, specifically because I ignored every single piece of advice you ever gave me. The room was silent. The truth hung in the air. Undeniable and suffocating. I had taken their doubt and used it as fuel. I had burned their criticism to keep my lights on. My father looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the realization hit him. He wasn't the origin of my success. He was the obstacle I had overcome. "We lost you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We didn't just miss the news. We lost the daughter. You lost her a long time ago." "Dad," I said, checking the door where the guard was signaling that the airspace was cleared. "You just didn't notice she was gone until she took the checkbook with her." I looked around the room one last time. The gold-plated golf clubs, the diamond bracelet, the expensive rug with the wine stain. It all looked so small. It looked like a set on a stage play that had run for too many seasons. "The check is on the floor," I said, pointing to the envelope. "You might want to pick it up. $3,000 is still $3,000. You can use it to pay the landscapers to fix the roses." I turned my back on them. There was nothing left to say. The autopsy was finished. The cause of death was confirmed neglect, suffocated by expectation. I walked toward the sliding glass door. The wind from the rotors battered against the glass, begging to be let in. I was ready to step into the storm. It was far warmer out there than it was in here. The roar of the helicopter blades had become a physical presence in the room, a rhythmic thumping that rattled the crystal in the china cabinet and vibrated through the soles of my boots. It was the sound of a different world coming to claim me. A world of kinetic energy and absolute power that had no patience for the stagnant air of this house. 2 men from my security detail stepped through the open sliding glass door. They were imposing figures, dressed in tactical black, their eyes hidden behind polarized Oakleys despite the darkness of the night. They moved with a synchronized precision that made Lucas's earlier posturing about managing the family portfolio look like the playground games of a child. "Principal, we are wheels up in 2 minutes, the lead agent announced, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority. "The airspace is cleared, but the perimeter is getting crowded. We need to move now." I nodded. "I am ready." I stood up from the sofa, smoothing the front of my wool coat. It was the last time I would perform this simple action in this room. I took a slow breath, inhaling the scent of pine needles, expensive floor wax, and the lingering, metallic smell of fear. I let my eyes wander around the space one final time. I looked at the wainscoting where my pictures should have been. I looked at the fireplace where I had been told my dreams were nothing more than hobbies. I looked at the dining table where I had been fed pity along with the turkey. It was strange. I expected to feel anger. I expected to feel a surge of vindictive triumph. But as I looked at the gilded cage of my childhood, all I felt was a profound, hollow release. It was the feeling of dropping a heavy backpack after a 10-mile hike. I wasn't angry anymore because they no longer had the power to make me angry. They were just people, flawed, small, terrified people, living in a house that was too big for their souls. My gaze landed on the coffee table one last time. The check for $3,000 was lying on the carpet where my father had shoved it, a rectangular island of white against the Persian wool. I bent down and picked it up. My father's head snapped up. I saw a flicker of light in his eyes, a desperate, pathetic spark of hope. In his mind, perhaps this was a sign of reconciliation. Perhaps he thought that by taking the money, I was accepting his apology, accepting the tether that bound me to them. He wanted me to need it, even now, facing the $12 billion reality of my life. He wanted to believe that his $3,000 still held some weight, some authority. "Riley," he whispered, half rising from his chair. I held the check between my thumb and forefinger. I looked at the spiky handwriting that spelled out my name. Riley Windermere. It was the name on the check, but it wasn't who I was anymore. I brought my other hand up. Reap. The sound of the paper tearing was soft, almost inaudible under the thunder of the helicopter. But in the room, it felt like a gunshot. My father flinched. My mother gasped. Her hand flying to her mouth, I tore it again, and again, until the check was nothing but a handful of confetti. I opened my hand and let the pieces drift down onto the polished mahogany table. They settled like snow, covering the resume guide and the coupon book. You should keep that, I said, my voice devoid of malice, cold and practical. Use the savings. Buy Lucas a few more suits, maybe something Italian. If he is going to pretend to be successful in a market he doesn't understand, he will need to look the part. Appearance is everything. Isn't that what you taught us? Lucas didn't say a word. He stood by the window, his face pale, watching the confetti settle. He knew, with a crushing certainty, that the suit comment wasn't just an insult. It was a dismissal. I wasn't just rejecting their money. I was rejecting their entire value system. I turned away from the adults. They were lost causes, calcified in their judgments. But there were two people in the room who still had a chance. I walked over to the corner where Noah and Emma were huddled together on the oversized love seat. They looked terrified, their eyes wide as they watched the armed men and the shaking windows. They were clutching their iPads, the blue light illuminating their innocent faces. I knelt down in front of them. It was the only time all night I had lowered myself voluntarily. I ignored the mud from the garden that was staining the knees of my jeans. Hey, I said softly, forcing a smile that reached my eyes. Don't be scared. It is just a loud car. It is going to take Aunt Riley back to work. Are you really a queen? Emma asked, her voice trembling. The man on TV said you were a queen. No, sweetie, I said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Queens inherit their kingdoms. I built mine. That is much better. I looked at Noah, the boy who had offered me his piggy bank, the boy who had shown me more compassion in 10 seconds than his father had shown me in 30 years. Listen to me, I said, my voice fierce and urgent. Both of you, look at me. They locked eyes with me. When you grow up, people are going to tell you who you are supposed to be, I said. They are going to tell you to be safe. They are going to tell you to follow the rules. They are going to tell you that your dreams are just hobbies. I glanced over my shoulder at their parents, then back to the children. Do not listen to them, I whispered. Do what you love. Build what you see in your head. If you want to paint, paint. If you want to build rockets, build rockets. Do not let anyone, not even your mom and dad, make you feel small. But Daddy says painting doesn't make money, Noah whispered. Daddy is wrong, I said firmly. And don't worry about the money. I am going to set up a special account for both of you. A trust fund. It will be yours, not your parents', yours. When you are 21, you can use it to do whatever you want. You will have freedom. Do you understand? They nodded, though I knew they couldn't fully grasp the magnitude of the promise I had just made. I had just handed them the keys to their own lives. Bypassing the generational trauma that had nearly crushed me, I stood up. Be good, and keep that piggy bank. Noah, it is the best investment you will ever make. I turned to the door. The lead agent signaled that we were at 0 hour. Time to go, ma'am, he said. I stepped through the sliding glass door and out into the storm. The world exploded into sensory chaos. The downdraft from the rotors hit me like a physical blow, tearing at my coat, whipping my hair across my face. The cold was biting, a sharp, freezing wind that scoured the heat of the house from my skin. The smell of aviation fuel was thick and intoxicating. I walked toward the black beast sitting on the lawn. The searchlight from the helicopter cut a cone of brilliance through the swirling snow, illuminating the wreckage of the garden. The rose bushes were flattened, the trellis was broken, The perfectly manicured order of the Windermere estate had been disrupted by the brute force of my reality. Beyond the hedge, the flashbulbs were still popping, a frenetic staccato of light in the darkness. I could see the paparazzi pushing against the perimeter fence, their cameras held high, desperate for one clear shot of the billionaire in her natural habitat. But my security team held the line. They were a wall of black Kevlar, blocking the vultures, ensuring that the only people who got to see me leave were the ones I chose. I didn't look at the photographers. I didn't look at the neighbors. I reached the helicopter. The agent offered me a hand, helping me up onto the step. I climbed into the cabin. Inside, it was a sanctuary of cream leather and digital displays. It was warm, quiet, and smelled of success. I buckled the 5-point harness, the heavy click of the metal latch sounding like a lock sealing a vault. I put on the noise-canceling headset. The pilot's voice came through, crystal clear. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Windermere. We have a direct flight path to the Manhattan helipad. ETA 20 minutes. Take us up," I said. The engine pitch whined higher. The ground fell away. I looked out the window. Down below, the Windermere mansion was shrinking. From this height, the grand Georgian estate looked like a toy house. I saw the illuminated rectangle of the living room window. Standing there, pressed against the glass, were 4 figures: my father, my mother, Lucas, and Catherine. They looked so small. They were just silhouettes against the light, trapped in their box, watching the thing they had rejected ascend into the sky. They were static. They were frozen in time, bound by their fears and their social standing and their coupons. They were watching me, but they couldn't reach me. I was rising above their judgment, above their expectations, above their entire world. A profound sense of liberation washed over me. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was lighter than happiness. It was the feeling of gravity finally releasing its hold. My phone vibrated in my hand. I looked down at the screen. It was a message from the White House Chief of Staff. "The President requests your presence for a breakfast briefing at 0700. He wants to discuss the implications of the grid integration on foreign policy. Please confirm." I typed a quick reply. "Confirmed. I will bring the data." I hit send. Then, I opened one last app, the family group chat. It was titled, Windermere Family Updates. The last messages were from earlier that day. My mother asking what time I would arrive. Lucas bragging about his bonus. It was a digital record of the life I used to live. I typed one final message. My thumbs moved steadily over the glass. "I will not be coming home for Christmas next year. I am busy saving the world. Enjoy the silence." I hit send. Then, without hesitating, I tapped the info button. I scrolled down to the bottom in red text. "Leave conversation." I pressed it. "Delete and block the phone" asked. I pressed yes. The chat vanished. The history was gone. The tether was cut. I looked out the window again. We had cleared the suburbs. Ahead of us, the horizon was glowing with a fierce amber light. New York City. The skyline was a jagged range of diamonds against the black velvet of the night. It was messy, loud, chaotic, and magnificent. It was my world. I leaned back in the leather seat, watching the darkness of Greenwich disappear behind me. Swallowed by the night and the snow, I didn't look back again. There was nothing there for me but ghosts, and I had a future to build. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Sunday Drama Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.